Good afternoon. A very warm welcome to everyone in the session. We at Tata Motors Insurance Broking take this opportunity to thank you all for joining this event. I'm Dr. Swati Iyer, Principal Consultant for Analytics and Wellness at Tata Motors Insurance Broking and Advisory Services Limited. World Mental Health Day is celebrated globally every year on 10th of October. It was first observed on October 10th, 1992. On this day, each year, various stakeholders of the mental health come together and be vocal about what we need to do for the mental health and general well-being. The COVID-19 pandemic has indeed accentuated the mental health issues, with experts mentioning both anxiety and depressive disorders at more than 25% during the first year of the pandemic itself. Mental health at Indian workplaces has been widely recognized in the last 2 to 3 years. Initiatives in the form of webinars, employee assistance program, teleconsults with psychiatrists has widely gained momentum during this period. As per a recent report published by Times of India, 28% of the global suicides occur in India, 57% of the people are not aware that they are suffering from their mental illness, and 26% reported that there is no mental health facility or specialty that is available within 50 kilometers of the radius. Greater than 70% had no health insurance coverage or thought that mental health treatment is not covered. Yes, it's indeed a topic that needs to be addressed, indeed a topic that has gained momentum in the last 2 to 3 years, and we are looking forward with our expert panelist. It's an honor and privilege to introduce a stalwart in the field of mental health, Professor Dr. Shekhar Seshadri, MBBS, DPM, MD Psychiatry. He is the former senior professor and head of Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, Dean Behavioral Sciences Division, and former director of NIMHANS. He is known for his research work and life skills training. He was a part of the national deliberations of the POSCO Act 2012. He has delivered thousands of lectures in various national and international conferences and has over 100 publications in national and international journals to his credit. Sir, thank you so much. I take this opportunity to welcome you on behalf of TMI BSL as well as all the participants and colleagues who have joined us for this session. Taking the discussion further, just a quick hygiene pointers that I would like to highlight. Anybody who has any questions can address their questions on the chat box. We would be briefly discussing on the agenda on the mental health at workplace, importance of certain programs that needs to be done, post which we will have an interactive question and answer session with Dr. Seshadri. Taking this into consideration and taking this forward, one of the recent reports of McKinsey, which was surveyed among different corporates, says that around 75% of the employers who have implemented the mental health programs agree that there is a social stigma at workplace when it comes to mental health. Having said that, Generation Z, yes, we are all moving away from the generation of millennials here. So Generation Z has reported higher levels of anxiety and depression. A 2022 cross-study industry report by Deloitte states that only 59% of the employees surveyed rated well-being as good or excellent. The most cited factors against well-being across both employees and C-suite workers is heavy workload or a stressful job. So, having said that, Professor Dr. Shekhar Seshadri, we would like to hear your thoughts on stress, whether it's an undue word that we put too much of importance and emphasize nowadays, or is it the near normal reality that most of us are living with? We give over to you, Dr. Shekhar Seshadri. I'll be taking in the questions accordingly and moderating it for the discussion. Thank you so much once again for coming on panel. So you're on mute.
Thank you very much, Swati, for that comprehensive framework that you have laid for the 200 plus participants who are online. Friends, you would have noticed that this whole event has been curated along the 3 R's, which is Rejuvenate, Realign, and Reach Out. In that order: Rejuvenate, do what your heart wishes; Realign, live in the present; and Reach Out, here to hear you. But let me take the Realign bit and use that as the central construct around which I'd like to share some ideas based on the kind of figures that Dr. Swati has presented and the kind of questions that she has raised on the whole construct of stress. particularly using the pandemic as a reference point, which has kind of made a difference to all our lives. That how far into the future does any human being predict her or his life? किसी भी व्यक्ति से ये सवाल हम पूछें कि भविष्य में कितने आगे तक आपने कल्पना की है? And you might have someone who says, I have made plans for 10 years. I have finished this part of my education. I have made investments. I have some seed money. You may have someone who says, I've made plans for 2 years because I finished my higher education. I'm going to take a gap year, do something on the field, and then come back and see where that takes me. But if you ask this question to a stockbroker, he will say 2 seconds, because with an investment that has gone awry, my whole world can come crashing down. The point being that no matter how law-abiding and traffic conscious you are, you're always subject to someone else's error of judgment. Does that mean that we live in paralysis and stop crossing the road? Let's look at this in another manner, particularly using the kind of figures that Dr. Swati referred to as we looked at what has happened in the workplace during the pandemic and the lockdown and the work from home paradigm, and those of you who have children and what happened to their lives, young children with preschool closed, schools closed, children with special needs, adolescent children with exit exams, imminent entrance exam postponed. What has all this meant to people's lives? There is a construct which is a pan-diagnostic construct, whether it is anxiety, whether it is depression, whether it is stress, whether it is suicidality, and this is called intolerance of uncertainty. Now, if you look at the pandemic with loss of predictability, loss of structure, loss of routine, loss of social spaces, loss of peer interaction and social interaction, and loss of play, if you look at children's lives on the one hand, and translate that into the workspace, it is not that the digital world and the online world did not exist before the pandemic. The whole work from home and the freedom and the flexibility that was accorded and afforded to many of you was there even before the pandemic. But the pandemic has only sharply brought to focus what social constriction does and our sense of connection and relationship with spaces and ecology. अब ecology की जब हम बात करते हैं, many of you may have had for some reason to get a MRI or a CT scan done. I myself have had it done several times for shoulder injury and ankle injury and so on. Friends, 10% of the people will say, I will die of the disease, but I'm not going inside that gantry. Claustrophobia. So what do social spaces mean in terms of larger well-being and mental health issues? And if you translate that to the kind of flexibility, the kind of camaraderie and social connections that you have in the workspace and in a pandemic, when that gets ruptured, a reset is actually required. And all of us are in the process of this reset as we are emerging from the pandemic. अब इस चीज को हम जब ecosystem की हम बात करते हैं, and we speak of the exosystem, the mesosystem and the endosystem, and by exosystem I mean things that happen at a very global and national level, चाहे वो जंग हो, युद्ध हो, war or the pandemic, or issues of economics, law and order, urban structure and all that, and how these are a source of stress for us. Recession is going on. What is the value of the rupee against the dollar? What is the world economy like? Is this all happening because of the Ukraine-Russia thing, or is it a post-pandemic issue? And look at the terrible state, friends, that Sri Lanka is in. The worst economic disaster in the history of that country, and how they are struggling. तो ये exosystem को लेके जो बड़े पैमाने पे किसी व्यक्ति पे इसका प्रभाव जो पड़ता है. Now, it's quite, I am not into stocks and shares in the market and all that. Many of us may come from a very conservative position, with this whole old mindset कि भैया LIC policy रखो, कुछ monthly income scheme में डालो, but let's not get into stocks and shares and stuff like that. But then if you move into meso systems, like your neighborhood or the society that you live in, and when you look at issues which are, let's say, communal in nature, or about the whole massive rain in Bangalore and gated communities got flooded, where the rich live, and what that happens to people were dislocated, hotel rates went up in nearby hotels, cars were totaled, their fridge and their TV and expensive stuff were floating all around. And what does that mean, in terms of... So when we speak about the fabric of stress in terms of our exchange and our interaction and negotiation with day-to-day life, तो ये meso system की बातें हो जाती हैं, जिसमें the workspace also constitutes a kind of a meso system, जिसके अंदर there will be micro issues. I will come back to the workspace, but let me speak about the micro, where it's about the family and about relationships and about the self. अब कुछ लोग इलायदा अकेले रहते हैं, कुछ लोग अपने माता पिता के साथ रहते हैं. Some of you are married, you have children. What are those relationships like? Is there conflict? Are there health issues? Are there individual issues of a personal nature, personal struggle, medical issues that you're dealing with? Juvenile onset diabetes. You're working now, but you've been taking insulin shots from you were 7 years old, or stuff like that. So these are some of the ordinary things that, and when I use the word ordinary, I use it not to belittle or trivialize the impact. I'm just saying that stress is not just massive earthquakes that take down tens of thousands of people. That also is at a global level. But World Mental Health Day, when it says make mental health a global priority, my submission to your friends is think global but act local. And as far as I'm concerned, the self is a global self. Your family has a certain global structure. Your workspace is a universe by itself, where all the dynamics that play out in the world play out in the workspace as well. And your negotiations with this actually structure, your well-being and your emotional health. Stress, therefore, does not have a tangible entity of its own. It's an attribution that an individual places on certain challenges and predicament that he or she experiences, and the trials and tribulations and the vicissitudes that one experiences and endures. It could be as innocuous as flooding in your basement and not being able to take your vehicle out to the nearby place to buy vegetables, to a 4-year-old who is not able to go to school and is a special needs child and there is some concern, to a parent who has been diagnosed as having a malignancy and you have to go in and out of hospital with him and having to take leave, to massive financial loss that you've had because of some crash down or some error in investment. So there's a whole range, or a relationship breaking down. So here's the funny thing about stress. Entrance exams are due, stress. Will I do well? There is a stress. I've done very well, but there are entrance exams for higher education, that's the stress. If I get in there, will I get a job? That's the stress. If I get a job, will I get a promotion? That's the stress. If I get a promotion, am I going to be able to work with my colleagues and my other people I report to? That's the stress. If you're heterosexual and wish to get married, but you're not able to, that's the stress. If you're not, then how do you come out to your family and help them understand their own struggles in comprehending what you're trying to say, because they have been socialized in the pernicious triangulation of patriarchy, heterosexism, and homophobia. And how do you convince them? Or, heterosexual, you're married, you don't have children, that's the stress. You have a child, but you're expecting another one, that's the stress. So the combination of an event, a temperament, your past methods of dealing with a certain situation, the robustness and extensivity of your social networks, all this makes a difference in how you negotiate some of the things that you're faced with. And this is the reason why the importance of extended social networks, not necessarily your immediate family, because there are certain things you may not be able to speak to mom or dad, but Swati is easier to approach, and it's comfortable, it's confident, you have the courage, you feel safe. But these bonds are necessary also in the family. But the importance of social networks and the importance really of having good friends on the one hand, and the whole personal ideology on life, which is that your life is lived with a certain purpose in mind, which is not just about compensation and your take-home salary and stuff like that, but is there an ideology that drives your life as far as what you do is concerned, that looks at your work experience beyond compensation? It's a cliche, but someone said a job or an employment is what gets you money, but a vocation is who you are. And what is that ideology that you bring into? Not that yourself needs to be defined entirely on the basis of your work. आपकी शख्सियत जो है, आपके व्यक्तित्व को संपूर्ण तरीके से जो आप काम करते हैं, उससे परिभाषित करना जरूरी नहीं है. So when you have many other interests in life, when you do stuff like volunteer, or you have a connection with the art and the aesthetics, when you look after other aspects of health, not just mental health, and the whole central construct of social cohesion and of love, to love, to be loved, and to have the right set of friends. And social cohesion is the answer to intolerance of uncertainty, this sense of community, this sense of connection. Let me give you a quick example before I give some concluding comments, and I'm sure Swati will be curating, a lot of stuff. In 2001, when the Gujarat earthquake took place in January, and many people were displaced and they were in camps and all that, and there were, of course, many issues. There were issues of social dislocation. There were issues of loss and grief. People were traumatized. Relief work was going on. So, there's a whole lot of stuff that goes on where disaster management is concerned. Now, when mental health professionals go to a camp, our approach there actually spans a range of 5 things that we need to do. At one level is depth therapy for individuals with severe post-traumatic stress disorder, who are so dysfunctional, so traumatized, that you have to do depth therapeutic and clinical work. At another level is counseling interventions for anxieties, concerns. They are not disabling or mental health issues or diagnosable mental health issues. and they're not as dysfunctional as the severe manifestations. But there are concerns and fears and anxieties, so counseling interventions. At another level, you're there to structure the day. And let's say children as an example, because routines have been disrupted. They're out of their homes. They are in these camps, in these tents. To structure their day to bring some predictability. At another level, to meet their developmental needs. They may be in this camp for 2 weeks, for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, who knows, till alternate arrangements are made. But their developmental needs need to be met. And at another level, you're there to express solidarity. Now, all important. So you see where well-being and emotionality is concerned, particularly when you think global and you act local, this is the kind of span that one needs to keep in mind when one speaks of the kind of approach that one can take. I want to come back to a point that Swati raised when she spoke about during the pandemic, the kind of figures about depression and the kind of figures about self-harm and suicidality. I want to share with you, friends, that suicidality is a spectrum as far as phenomenology is concerned. And I want to make this point very clearly because it's exceedingly important in the context of the session we are doing today. There is a difference between a person who says, I'm in a I was making the point, friends, about the spectrum of suicidality. And this is very critical as far as your negotiation and your experience at the workplace is concerned, in also the spectrum with which you respond to any experience, whether it's a misunderstanding with a colleague, whether it's an irate boss, whether it's not meeting deadlines, or whether it's work circumstances that are not congenial, or whether there's pressure from home, or you're looking at better opportunities. There are many reasons why a certain dissonance or conflict is created in your minds. So there's a difference between a person who says, I'm in a difficult situation, main kathin paristhiti mein hu, as opposed to a person who says, my difficult situation is intolerable, meri kathin paristhiti asahaniya hai. As opposed to a person who says, I do not wish to live, main jeena nahi chahta. As opposed to, I wish to die, main marna chahta hu. As opposed to, I wish to kill myself, main apne aap ko marna chahta hu. They are not the same. And it is important to recognize at which spectrum one is, not just for the person experiencing these thoughts and these feelings, but also for the community as a large. जब हम social cohesion की बात करते हैं, so the idea of recognizing stress, worry, and anxiety is very critical. तो उसके चिन्ह क्या हैं? Is it sleep issues or appetite issues? Is it irritability? Is it not wanting to talk? Is it not being able to manage time? Is it about displacement on the family? Is it about losing? These are all signs of how do we recognize signs of fatigue, of stress, of worry, of anxiety there. But not just that, to also recognize triggers and patterns. Because, this is the funny thing. When we think of a pattern, we think a pattern is a nice thing. Even dysfunctional families have patterns. And dysfunctional thoughts also have patterns. तो इसलिए बात करने में, बोलने में कोई हर्ज नहीं है. Every human being has the right to narrate his story and the right to be heard by sensitive and respectful systems, so that the whole diffusion of the kind of situation that you're in does not escalate to the spectrum that I spoke about. And it is handled at the level itself. When you're saying, I'm in a difficult situation, and you speak to someone and they are receptive, they are understanding, sensitive, respectful, assisting, and then the thought process, kind of diffuses that. So for this reason, it's important to keep in mind that aam taur pe, we are living in a situation where on the one hand, there are these large administrative systems of governance, and then there's this whole technology and media and stuff happening all around, बहुत ज़्यादा clutter है. So the whole issue of decluttering, our lives and to render them not elemental, but in a manner that एक हल्कापन जो है, a certain playfulness, a certain lightness to life, and do things other than work, whether it's music, whether it's art, whether it's writing, or or whether it's walking or exercise, or doing some social work, but finding a space, a reflective space for yourself, not just to do prayer and manan chintan and prarthana, wo bhi kijiye, that also helps, but also the license, to laugh and joke and be silly at times. And it's important for that levity and lightness to actually mitigate some of the challenges that can otherwise be vexations. And so this is the kind of framework so there are the various systems I spoke about, the macro, the meso, and the micro, and what happens around them. And then there are all the kind of systemic issues that take place which clutter our lives. And then there is the kind of scaffolding that we can bring for ourselves by disclosure, by conversations, the whole culture of conversations. And this is what I often say, even in child rearing and parenting. And I'm hoping that I'll be able to get together with you guys at some other point of time in future, actually to speak about family and parenting in a little more depth. One of the misfortunes I find about the relationship of adults with children, that it's not constructed on the basis of a culture of conversations. Its basis is a culture of instruction, expectation, control, and obedience. But when there's conversation and openness and receptivity to hearing people's experience without judging, without sermonizing, but validating, you feel assuaged, you feel reassured, you feel respected, you feel valued. And ultimately, I think it boils down to what value do I have am I valued in? And this is what we found, even when we study individuals who are suicidal, at some point of time, they have heard in their lives a statement that devalued them. The simplest of which is this kid who goes to a father and presents his report card, or the mother, and they look at the report card and look at the child and just shake their head. Nothing is said, but a lot is conveyed. Or various spectrum of, I'm disappointed with you. तुम कभी नहीं सुधरोगे, या तुम कब सुधरोगे, or why are children like you born? You see what kind of damage this kind of communication does to a person's sense of value and worth. So when push comes to shove, 5 years later or 10 years later, that's the inner voice that then takes precedence and then channelizes or directs what kind of behavioral disposition you gravitate towards. तो साथियों, ये एक चौखट है जो मैंने present किया है, and this is the kind of thing I hope when you make yourself simple and joyful list of things to do, when your thought processes are not centered only around yourselves, but also this outward looking kind of an approach, the whole shramdaan jisko kehte hain, the seva and the service mode, then the rejuvenation and the reaching out process, ये तीन चीज जो है, rejuvenate, realign and reach out, इसकी संधि जो है, that really comes together to make things worthwhile and make things reassuring for you. So this is what I wanted to share with you. I can immediately see that questions are coming on chat, and we are at the halfway mark now. And Swati, should I just take them as they are coming? Or
no, sir. I will curate that for you. I will curate that for you. So thank you so much for the wonderful introduction that we started with. So I think if I just retrospectively look at what you mentioned right now, I think you have actually covered all stages of life to some extent with all the pressures that all of us deal beginning from childhood to the old age that we look into. But having said that, sir, and really it was a insightful introduction that we could begin with. I'm sure that majority of the concerns that we might be having will be sorted out in the first bit itself. So, like you rightly mentioned, everything is a stress nowadays, be it traveling to work, be it attending schools, children needs, be it getting a promotion and then dealing with colleagues accordingly. So every stage of life, what we encounter right now is somewhat that we say about stress. But then having said that, sir, there are few employees or few colleagues, because I'm putting it with perspective to the workplace. There are people who deal effectively with stress, given the amount of pressure or given the position or the designation that they hold into, versus people who are not able to cope up with the same expectations that is set. So is there any secret mantra wherein you can actually lead a stress-free life, or rather, if I may put it as a person to you, if I say that how come the person sitting opposite to me is able to handle and mitigate the stress, whereas I'm not able to do the same in my life. So what is your turnout on that, sir?
This calibration, which is inherent in this question, and different people's abilities to deal with the job at hand, the quantum to deliver. Whenever people follow the intent, content, method and process paradigm, कुछ जिम्मेदारी आपको सौंपी जाती है, इरादा ये है कि फलाने समय में in this much of time it has to be completed. And you peruse the content and you see this is what to be done, and you adopt a particular method, and that method is then subjected to processes of validation, checking and so on. Now, different people have different speeds of operation and different ways in which they actually address and negotiate the kind of stuff that is given to them. And this is not about right or wrong. It's essentially this efficiency and the validation that comes from efficient completion of an X quantum of job on the one hand, and the regret or terror that comes from not being able to complete even half of that for some other human being, rests on two issues. One, of course, is approach to the work itself, which means, time management, accurate judgment and assessment of what is the quantum involved, how much do you spend on immersion, and how familiar are you with the stuff that is given to you. But on the other hand, it also depends on a combination of experience and with that of the temperament and personality of the human being in question. The limit of your competence is the limit of your experience. सामर्थ की सीमा अनुभव की सीमा है. So jitna experience hoga, so it's quite possible that you're not able to complete less than what someone else did. But it's a learning point from where there can be a curve if one processes enough to say what worked and what didn't work and how did I approach it. We call these friends as meta processing. So for any job efficiency, to examine what was completed efficiently or not, and then come up with a plan so that the next time you do it, the valence of your efficiency or the calibration of your efficiency is scaled up by 2 points, by 3 points, by 4 points, and you get better and better. Would you still come up to this number one who is like the boss's favorite? I don't know about that. There are some exceptionally gifted people, and that's all right. But I come from a position where I believe that everyone has his or her place, and there is place for everyone. It's a question in a system where every cog in the system is important. The non-functioning of one cog makes a difference in the entire machinery and how it works. And I think each of you has a value. Ultimately, it's one may say that it's what you produce, and it's in the quantum or the quality of your deliverables that everything matters. But does it? My final word on this is it's very similar to the examination system. I wrote a piece once, rejoice, it's examination time. Funny, isn't it? No one ever thought of examinations as a joyous experience. There's always a sense of doom, disaster, and finality around it, whereas examination should actually be a celebration of learning. And it never is, because outcome, result, and performance is given more prominence over effort and process. तो मेरा एक दोस्त है, he is a director of a consortium of school. I said, तुम यार एक फील्ड हायर करके एग्जामिनेशन मेला क्यों नहीं करते हो? पंडाल वंडाल लगा दो, and people will be standing at the entrance as students come in. You throw rose water on them, open book stalls, mathematics stall, geography stall. Create a joyous atmosphere about the whole issue of this, exit exam or how you perform that. So those are some of my responses. Swati, over to you.
Sure, sir. Thank you so much. So if I may just summarize what sir said, should we be happy with the phrase that apna time aayega, and we need to be living hopefully and peacefully with whatever workplace that we have, and look out for better opportunities in future as well. Participants, I can see a lot of questions on the chat box. So what I will do is I'll try to categorize it under different headings, because it's a mix of questions that I'm getting. It's a mixed bag, sir. So I'm just taking the question further because we're talking with respect to workplace. So how do we deal with conflict at work, and how do we deal with co-workers who are not very supportive, were two of the questions that I could quickly browse through. So I think sir has already answered that question in bits and pieces when I posed this question. So going further, sir, we also understand that majority of the issues that we face today, be it infertility, be it anything related to the heart-related disorders, which we see are on rise, all of this is somewhere or other attributed to stress at the end of the day. So having said that, though many of us know that it's easier said than done is what we say. It's easier to say that you need to manage stress, you need to prioritize things, you need to work on your timelines and deliverables. But actually, when we put this into function, and when people all actually deal it in their day-to-day life, it really becomes a task, because like you rightly mentioned, it's not only about the professional life that we look into, the personal life also contributes to the conflicts that one has, and maybe some of it pours into the workplace and vice versa. So, sir, having said that, what are the key factors that you would like us to understand, like how do we manage stress? Because there are questions pertaining to what are the top 5 strategies that we could look out. Does yoga help? Does meditation help to deal with the stress? So what is your take on that, sir?
Let me framework this, Swati, but I will start with the whole conflict in the workplace paradigm and just a couple of lines on that. Every system must have a mechanism in place for workplace conflict. I was actually the chairperson of the Grievance Redressal Committee in NIMHANS for 3 years, where I had to deal with 280 grievances. I sometimes wonder, what about the stress of the chairperson of the Redressal Grievance Committee, other than the person who is the complainant? So when there is a mechanism in place, and the mechanism is known to be transparent, open, and fair, then whether or not you're assuaged, you have the reassurance that there is a system in place. But coming from that to many issues, so there is stress, there is anxiety, and what are the methods to deal with it? So let me go through a lot of responses. When anxiety can be a normal response, do I experience anxiety? Yes, I do. As simple as if I have to take a flight and I'm well in time, but there's such a massive traffic jam that I'm just log jammed in that place. And anxiety can be a symptom of, as Swati mentioned, of infertility, or illness in a family member or workplace conflict. And anxiety can be a disorder. So Jivan Chandra Kanpal, yes, if anxiety is disabling and incapacitating, then it is quite okay for a period of time to take medication, but it is judicious use of medication that should be pulled out. And if they are benzodiazepines, they do have the possibility of causing habituation. But I believe that when there is agitation and there is too much happening, then it is quite all right for short term to take some medication, but not in. What I usually say is that the choice is not between medication and other methods. The choice is other methods and or medication. And that's where going into some of the specific questions that have been. So whether it is, yes, regular exercise, regular yoga, breathing, mindfulness, art-based work, uh, all these are effective basically to bring down the arousal. They may not resolve your primary conflict, but they at least take you to a situation where your arousal is less and you're better equipped then to whether it's to deal with co-workers during a stressful time, as Anirudh has asked. Um, so Dasgir Sheikh, in response to your question on these methods and what Swati said, it's important to keep this in mind. To take this further, people try to relieve their stress in many other ways. This could be withdrawing, this could be tobacco, this could be alcohol, and I see that Manoj has put a question down on how to quit tobacco. That now, if it has reached a stage where see, there is a difference between experimental use, recreational use, problem use, and dependent use. So many of these substances, if they have reached a stage of problem and dependent use, they need to be treated, and there are good treatments available. So it's not just about detoxification, so how to reduce craving, how to reduce cues. So remember what I said about recognizing triggers and patterns, but it's also about, so just doing detoxification or taking anti-craving drug is not enough. If your triggers are family issues, that also has to be resolved. So there is no shame, there's no stigma in actually seeking help. And it is in this reason what Arundas is pointing out, the critical value of the harmony between work and home. So critical that, so how do you define your identity? Entirely on the basis of my work, or my work is incidental, that my family is important to me? These kind of polarized positions are really not important, are really problematic. So one needs to take a more balancing and make the time, even if it means you're spending half an hour a day with a child or with your two children playing some game, but you're genuinely, authentically invested in that. You're not just pretending to make the time, you're genuinely invested. It makes a lot of difference in the way that you use these techniques too. So yes, judicious use of medication in severe manifestations, other methods to reduce arousals, but more specific therapeutic techniques to actually deal with the primary conflict and the primary stress, so that, as Pratyush is pointing out, is burnout a real term, or is it hyper exaggerated in millennials? Nahi, Pratyush, hota hai. There are many people who do reach a stage where Seligman called it the giving up complex, that or when you reach a stage of learned helplessness, particularly where the stress is very high, and particularly when you're dealing with multiple stresses. There was financial loss, there's a health issue, there's a loss experience, and the marital relationship is fragile. Many things are happening together. So we call this as a clustering of events. And this is the time when having good friends, a close network of people to speak to are easy. So yes, in summary, to what Misbah is asking, methods, and some of the best methods. Yes, talk, speak, seek help, regular yoga, exercises, volunteer, journal writing, connecting to some of the hobbies that you have. People sometimes in adulthood sort of trivialize or belittle the impact of, let's say, doodling or coloring. They say, "Oh, adult coloring book, come on, this is puerile." That not really. Uh, in fact, Gil Saab, जो पूछ रहे हैं, what is ADHD? This whole business, not as a disorder, but when your attentional processes go awry because there's just too much happening. Sometimes it's good to take an adult coloring book. They're very complex, and just working on it so that you get focused, and then the whole arousal kind of comes down, so that all the medical issues that people have spoken about, hormones affecting stress. You see, because if you're stressed and you don't sleep, many hormones have circadian secretions, your cortisol and all us. And when your sleep patterns go awry, so there is a bi-directional relationship between stress and hormones, between stress and acidity, between stress and digestion, between stress and chronic illnesses. So these are all between stress and migraine, as Glavin Colino is pointing out. So these are all issues of. So yes, when Julie Sinha says does sound therapy help, I presume she means music and not just neutral or white noise. But yes, these are all. But it depends on what works for you. So to be experimental, to look at what makes you feel light, what you enjoy doing, and to rediscover the joys of that lightness, and the lightness of that joy is really very critical. Swati, over to you.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for summarizing it on all the questions that we have on the chat box. One of the important aspects that we also would like to highlight is on the social media presence. I would rather put it into effects of the social media presence, and like Pratyush has just rightly pointed out, saying that is it a catalyst to the mental illness that many of the younger generation is phasing into? Having said that, children having access to digital technology and having increased accessibility to these tools, does that also contribute to stress that children or parents have and have to deal with it in the future? So what is your take on that, sir?
See, let me come back again to the point I made earlier. You cannot wish the social media away. It has come to stay. You cannot wish the digital world, the online world away. Online education, the digital world existed even before the pandemic. Its context became sharply delineated because of the limitations that the pandemic placed on us because of the lockdown. Schools were closed, workspaces were closed. So all this work from home, study from home, and online education and online work only sharply brought this to the fore. But Swati, one thing has pretty robust evidence in scientific literature. If you look at the viral content in the kind of technology, the digital world that exists today, it has definitely shortened attention spans. This, in my instance, was noticeable in children. But even in adults, the whole preoccupation with the digital world and screen time and all the not necessarily very grave and serious viral content, but all your memes and your Twitter and your Insta and your TikTok, and everybody wants to sort of put out stuff, and everybody is an actor, singer, mover, and shaker, and laughs all around. And so, what does this do in terms of the centering, जिसको हम हिंदी में ठहराव जो कहते हैं, एक स्थिर मन जो है. This is not to say कि मजा नहीं करना चाहिए, कि डांस नहीं करना चाहिए. That it's good to to move and shake and have fun. But this is true that and particularly the pandemic with the surfeit of stuff coming on and all the anxiety that it generated. And if you look at the whole narrative in the second wave, when the quantum of deaths, including in younger people without comorbidity who were vaccinated, started taking place. Um, uh, this became the vaccination occurred a little later, but during the second wave, before the vaccination started. But the narrative was not about old people with comorbidity. It was even younger people that the vaccination came much later in Jan of the next year, which was basically 2021. Media has technology, media, viral content, screen time. The digital world has both its positives and its negatives. It's a question, therefore, when we actually put out from the Indian Association of Child and Adolescent Mental Health our guidelines for screen time, we said preschool, not more than 90 to 120 minutes of screen time, and that too not continuously, over 4 or 5 periods of 15 to 20 minutes. And then the 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds, 2 to 3 hours, and the 16, 17, 5, 6 hours because of online education, and that too not continuously. We spoke about a family plan. We spoke about the use of the digital world to maintain social contact and not just unprocessed passive watching, but to use it for conversation and social contact, so that there was a family plan, and also to have protected time where there is family connection and family cohesion independent of the screen, so that that experience is kept alive, and otherwise it gets skewed towards an engagement with the screen, that creates a problem, and then how our wiring kind of changes that. So these are issues that screen time itself, and then of course the nature of the content itself. I won't dwell into that into detail. That's the theme for another session altogether. Content on aggression, content on sexuality, and its impact, particularly on older adolescents and young adults. What does that mean, and who censors all this? And is there a lot of inappropriate content, online? So many complexities to this that we need to keep in mind. Swati?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for that, sir. One important question that I would like to, so like we understand that workplaces have started gaining importance or emphasizing the importance of having a strategy towards mental health at workplace. So having said that, bringing in the EAP programs or having a teleconsult facility available for a consultation with a psychiatrist or a psychologist. So as a person, if I want to understand, like I may be coming to work normally, I may be doing my work, but then there are certain signs and symptoms which I may not be able to identify or diagnose myself as an individual. So having said that, one of the question also talks about how do we identify signs of depression or subclinical depression in a person, and how do we know that at what time should we seek an intervention accordingly?
I also noticed these questions, when Rashmi Roy Chaudhary, I think, asked about how to identify signs of depression. She, in fact, even asked, subclinical depression kya hai? Interestingly, Reshmi ke question ke baad hi, Ashwini Karvini asked, how do I control anger and frustration? So there you have an answer. A person who was otherwise equanimous, and suddenly for the last 2 weeks, a lot of irritability, chidchidapan, a lot of anger and frustration. Very unusual. People say, "Arey, ho kya gaya yaar Ashwini Karvi ko?" And ऐसा तो नहीं था पहले that. So sometimes manifestations of depression is not necessarily withdrawal, crying spells, and self-harm. So if you look at it from a very clinical perspective, the manifestations of depressions are in behavior, in thought, in emotions, and in biological and vegetative functions. So behavior may withdrawal, crying spells, not coming to work, late submissions or self-harm behaviors. And in thoughts, it's about, this whole hopelessness, helplessness, worthlessness, what used to be called as the negative triad. In emotions, it's about sadness, about being blue, but it's also about irritability, which is often not recognized there. And in vegetative functions also, it's basically sleep and appetite disturbances, loss of libido, and loss of weight, and so on. But sometimes one has to be alert to the kind of messages that has to be given. And it's a question of how alert one is to some of the signs and hints which are not overt. Now, if someone is overtly, sobbing from morning till evening, you know that something is really wrong. But if someone is, unusually quiet, that and this was not in keeping with this person's past temperament and demeanor and deportment, for someone to say, Ashwini, a little quiet today, anything the matter? Just worried, I was just concerned. And Ashwini to say, Kisi ne to notice kiya yaar. Somebody took the trouble to ask me, as opposed to, how much longer are you going to take to deliver that, you're just sitting here not talking to anyone, which is not really recognizing that the person may be dealing with some issues. It's also the extent to which the lives and the stories of people. Are you aware that there's a health issue in the family? Are you aware that they've been, married for 7 years, 10 years, and Swati, like you pointed out, they've been like desperately trying your IVF and stuff like that, and nothing is happening, and it's unfortunate that they're dealing with it, and you're aware of all this. So context matters. So one of the things to be aware is to be aware of the context of your colleagues, the context where they come from, not to be probing or curious in an intrusive way, but just to be open and aware and compassionate, and helpful and respectful to this issue. So that's the kind of stuff that one would need to keep in mind. Swati?
Yes. So thank you for highlighting those parameters. I think those are really important. Having said that, yes, it is a sign that needs to be observed. And like you rightly pointed out, if we can spot the difference amongst while at workplace or while at home for that matter, if my partner suddenly becomes reclusive or my kid is not communicating the way it used to after coming from school. So simple tips like this, if we are able to analyze and then take corrective measures at the proper time, that I think would go a long way in controlling the outbursts that we usually would not expect further. So, having said that, your take on what we need to work upon in the workplace also. One of the questions that was lingering in my mind was men versus women, or the gender disparity when it comes to. So we understand that when it comes to men, there is a thing that there cannot be an emotional outburst, or it's more of a patriarchal system in that aspect that yes, they may not have these emotional outbursts, or they cannot have a lean in shoulder. So it's equally important that we understand these signs in them as well and ensure that they take the corrective measures at the proper time. So not that stress affects only women or stress affects only men in their life, but then every gender for that matter is equally susceptible to these changes at different periods of their lives. And like you rightly mentioned in the beginning itself, a person being a heterosexual is a cause of concern for whatever reasons to tell it to their parents and to get the things in place. So what is your take on men not being actually venting out the emotions, or do you feel that there's a change that we can see in the years to come?
Gender is a complex dimension in the way that it plays out both in the context of how men and women respond to the same predicament and in terms of vulnerability. So if you look at gendered socialization, how boys and girls are essentially socialized in their growing years, uh, and the kind of stereotypes or the kind of archetypes that we have in mind. Um, we often say in the work that I had done, for example, on masculinity many years ago, in a series of 8 films, this was a project called Let's Talk Men 1.0 and 2.0. 5 or 6 documentary films makers from a couple of South Asian countries got together and made films which we wanted to screen for young people, for youth, with a discussion guide for them to develop a more nuanced idea of masculinity. The issue, Swati, is that masculinity is not so much about the experience of absolute power. While it is true in a patriarchal society that men enjoy or force themselves to enjoy more power over women, the truth is that men have power over other men also, based on schisms that are based on caste or social structure and social status. So masculinity is not so much about the experience of absolute power, it's about the experience of entitlement to power. And where does this entitlement come from? It comes from socialization processes. So this is where, when we speak about the culture of egalitarian families, समान अधिकारी संस्कृति जिसको हम कहते हैं कि जिम्मेदारियां कैसी बांटी जाती हैं families में, for people to say this is not my job. I mean, where is it written that to put harpic in the toilet bowl is not the job of the man? Where is it? Where is this written? All these are patriarchal constructs that, and to then put it in the context, for example, look at the question that Deepika Das has put down: how to deal with grief, and how do you perform your responsibility and live your life, and how do loss and grief experiences play out where men and women are concerned? That is there a gender difference, or is loss a universal phenomena? So I often quote the fact that many of these depend on contextual factors, and the most effective way in which I can address this is by quoting Mark Twain when he says, "Nothing that grieves can be called little. In the eternal laws of proportion, the loss of a doll for a child and the loss of a crown for a king are events of the same magnitude." तो चाहे वो मर्द हो या औरत हो, उसको जो अनुभव हुआ, what is the meaning and the significance of that experience for that person, irrespective of. Now, that meaning may be influenced by gender processes, that, just as the notion of honor for, let's say, in the context of molestation or abuse is a very gendered kind of. But equally problematic is the construction of man, both as the protector and the predator. It is an ingenious construction of patriarchy to basically control the mobility and freedom of women. So, when people speak, for example, about safety of women and stress that occurs in women, and depression and anxiety and fear, that terror that occurs because you feel insecure and safe, I feel that the debate on the safety of women is a perverse debate because it's an incomplete debate. The debate must equally be on the freedom of women. A woman should have the right to be anywhere she wants at any time, wearing whatever the hell she wants. That doesn't give anyone the license to. These are all constructs of. The fight is not between men and women. The fight is between men and women who are for patriarchy and men and women who are against patriarchy. So that's the kind of more, I think, macroscopic picture that one needs to take while really wrapping our heads around the issue, complex issue that you have tabled as far as gender is concerned. Swati, over to you to close the session.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. I really like the comment that you made by Mark Twain. Yes, a child losing a doll and a king losing his kingdom to a battle is something similar that they experience, and the grievance is something that we cannot counteract to it. Having said that, sir, do you mind if we extend it for 5-10 more minutes? Is that okay at your schedule?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I will have some quick fire chat questions that's mentioned, so I just don't want to skip. Though we have covered majority of them, I would just look at some of the questions that we can look into. So post-COVID anxiety level seems to be increased. How to overcome this? So what I understand is you have already given certain measures, but anything that you would like to give as a bit?
No, like I said, what the construct on which post-COVID anxiety is based is intolerance of uncertainty. And intolerance of uncertainty needs to be addressed by actually looking at a description or a specification of what one is uncertain about, and then looking at a problem-solving approach to look at how you mitigate that. There may be 5 things you're uncertain about. For 2 of them, solutions are immediately available. For one of them, a solution is not immediately in sight. For 2 others, there are a couple of possible solutions. You don't know what will work, what will not work. But you're at least bringing down the context of your uncertainties by a significant amount. So that's the way that this actually has to do with styles of coping. There are many styles of coping. So there is avoidant coping, so you basically avoid, and that doesn't help. But there is also very proactive coping by which you draw upon your strengths. And so these are called strength-based approaches. When we work on resilience, we work on building social relationships. We work on the legitimacy and entitlement to counseling and therapeutic help. So these are all positive methods of coping, positive coping rather than some of the problematic methods of coping. Swati?
Yes. So I have one very relevant question here posted by one of the participants. I'm not hitting an elevation in status or promotion in the job for a very long period. It's a major trigger for stress. Expecting that situation may change does not reduce the stress, but it increases day by day. How do I overcome it?
Well, I had referred to job hai, promotion nahi mila, stress hai, promotion mila, lekin colleagues are not, wo bhi stressed hai. Kisi aur company mein someone got the same promotion, but their remuneration is much better than mine. See, let's break this down. One, promotion. Second, not getting promotion for a long period of time. There's a combination of 2 issues here. So you've been passed over, that you were due, you had the eligibility, but you were passed over. Were you passed over for reasons that are fair, legitimate, transparent, or is there blatant, unfairness? So all this makes a differential and so should one feel angry and resentful or unfairly treated, or should one feel despondent and stressed, really depends on this context. So expecting that situation may change does not reduce the stress but increase, because aap aashaon mein, anticipation mein, so do you live in the world of anticipation, or do you live in the world of reality, or do you look at alternatives there? One of the things, even with a condition like OCD, for example, it is not that you fear that something will definitely happen. You anticipate the possibility of it happening. तो आप संभावनाओं में जब जीते हैं, you live in the realm of possibility rather than in the. So a lot of these Misbah are actually called acceptance-based approaches. Now one may argue to say this is very fine. You're teaching me to accept unfairness. That's not what I mean. This is not to say one must not speak out about unfairness. So that's not what acceptance-based approaches mean. Acceptance-based approaches means that there will always be limitations and one must speak out, one must do the best. But is your well-being defined by this one fact of promotion or its absence, or is its pain and impact actually mitigated and reduced by many other things that you feel define you, your family, your hobbies, your friends, other, the volunteering that you do. That so while this frustration continues, its magnitude gets kind of mitigated because you define yourself in many other ways rather than exclusively by the fact of your job, and within that fact the absence of the promotion, and within that promotion the fact that it's been for a long time, and within the long time the fact that you had the eligibility but someone was unfairly, was junior, was less qualified, was actually promoted ahead of you. So I feel that people who are in this situation need someone to vent. All this is usually kept within you. You may be venting this to your family, they may understand, they may not understand. But to be able to tell your story and to be heard with respect, attention, and with some strategy and planning would really help. Swati.
Thank you so much, sir. That was really insightful. So you just spoke about anticipation. So like we always say, it is all in the mind. So the importance of communication, or the fear of communication, if I may put it like that. So there are many things that we form a story in the mind before even looking at the complete aspect of it. So how important do you feel as a expert that it's really important to communicate your feelings to be a manager, to your spouse or to your partner, so that things are not exaggerated the way it is, or maybe there could be a better outcome out of it?
It's a balance. If you look at organizational behavior on the one hand, or work experiences and the extent to which you carry them home, and the aspect of communication. Does the workplace have some kind of a provision, every quarterly, for a retreat where these things are? Now, are you going to be basically bleeding all over at home with your spouse, who may or may not understand the complexity of the workplace because he or she comes from a different sector? Or are you going to be completely silent? That, again, this is polarization. There is no point in telling my family anything. I have to deal with this on my own. Or I have to tell them every little bit, every little process, every word, the tone in which it was said. And, do you have to go into that entire script and screenplay and detail and from which angle, and then overwhelm your partner and overwhelm yourself in the process. So, where does the balance lie? So there are certain aspects of workplace stress that you can deal with on your own. There are certain aspects of workplace stress that you can address by actually dealing with your colleagues or the person who you report to. There are some you want to share with your partner because that's the nature of your relationship. You speak about your stuff that happened in the day, good things and not so good things. That's what a family is about. You talk, you communicate. Silence is really not the method to live out a relationship. It doesn't work that. So if you put all this together, I would really say that talking, speaking, and communicating is essential. One must talk, one must speak. That this doesn't mean that you have to, like I said, go into every detail, but it's important to sometimes communicate in broad strokes. And and depending on the time at hand, depending on the receptivity, depending on the nature of the relationship, there is a response from the other side, a response of interest. Tell me more about. Similarly, if you are also receptive to other people's narrative, and I recall once I read a paper in a psychiatric journal, and it was called Empathy and the Therapeutic Uses of Wonder. And empathy ultimately means, if Smita is communicating to me some of her predicament at work, and I'm listening to her with a sense of wonder, which is to say, really, और फिर क्या हुआ? और उसके बाद, so I'm expressing wonder and interest. So it makes a person feel respected, valued, that my experiences and my communication as that someone is interested in me, my life, my experiences, my narrative, my feelings, my thoughts. They are valued, and that goes a long way in actually reducing some of the arousal, the resentment, the rancor, the anger, the regret, the irritation, the rage, the frustration that takes place there, to a level where you then feel ready enough, you have the stamina, you have the bandwidth to then be able to deal with the complexity actually of the situation. So I'm not trying to take away from sometimes the complexity and the difficulty of the situation at hand. But a lot of these mechanisms help in taking you to a stage where you feel prepared and confident and ready and skilled to be able to handle it to some levels of fruition and some level of success. No guarantee offer about 100% success, but you tried, and you tried with sincerity, and you feel better for having done so rather than being passive and accepted it, and then harboring the resentment in your heart for the rest of your life and defining your identity on the basis of this. So these are all narratives of how we construct the self. Do you construct the self only on the basis of this narrative of being sidelined, of frustration, or do you say that's part of the narrative, but so and so heard me out, and I really felt relieved that there was someone who understood my predicament. Swati?
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for that. So yes, we are nearly at 4:20 now, so wrapping up the session quickly. So understand that, sir, you are very busy in your schedule. You are managing multiple tasks simultaneously, traveling across. Obviously, child psychiatry is something that you are completely into. So, sir, how do you manage your stress, and what are your stress buster mechanism? And I have got requests from across. We have seen certain videos of yours on YouTube, and we understand that you are a very good singer as well. So, if we have to ask you to summarize, so it's a request from our end. If we have to ask you to summarize in some 4 or 5 lines on some Bollywood song that you would like to summarize the life that all of us at workplace live, what is your intent on that, sir?
Well, you remember I spoke about purpose in life and a certain service motto and an ideology on work that was never based on salary and compensation. I wouldn't be working for the government for 41 years if I really wanted to make money. And I've had the most fantastic education. Of course, one would say, if you look at the escalation values, 360 rupees a year for medical college fees in the best medical college in the whole world, Maulana Azad Medical College. I have a sense of obligation. You may call it nationalist, you may call it patriotic, or whatever. That I feel that I have an obligation and a responsibility to the children of this country because they are 40% of the population, and many children come from vulnerable circumstances. So that's something that. So there is a larger aim and purpose that I have. Secondly, I had often said when I speak to teachers in schools about what the purpose of education is, and people speak about numeracy, literacy, livelihood, career, all of which are legitimate. Right? But I've often said that the true purpose of education is the development of an egalitarian personhood, ek samanadhikari vyaktitva ka vikas, the development of a socially responsive and responsible citizen, nagrikta, and the development of identity that is imbued with aesthetic sensibility, kala, prakriti, rangmach, sangeet, rishte, emotions. And so music and theatre have always had value for me, the art and the aesthetics. And therefore music, both in terms of playing and listening. So learning, a language, learning to play, and the fact that I play both tabla and steel string acoustic electric, which means I'm ambidextrous, is really good for, because tabla is also both hands, and, so both hemispheres of the brain actually work. तो खैर बॉलीवुड की हम क्या बात करें, हम हमेशा as a possible segue to a session that we might do on family and parenting, हम हमेशा ही question पूछते हैं कि you ask any human being, what do you remember about your childhood? बचपन के बारे में क्या याद है? उसको वही, you'll remember that which is a memory, and a memory is something that happened very often, or it happened once, but it was so horrible or so happy that भूले भी भुला नहीं जाता, unforgettable kind of. So what I remember about my childhood, in my house there was 100-year-old bell, and it was my job during mealtime to ring it, and everybody would gather, they would sing Antakshari khelte the, and now at the age of 40 it has pride of place in my house. You know what I remember about my childhood? मेरे घर में एक संस्कृति थी, हर हफ्ते बाजू के अनाथ आश्रम में जाके सेवा करना, and I got the inspiration to do social work from there. I did BSW, MSW, and here at the age of 50, I'm HRD manager in Tata, the company where Swati works. Do you know what I remember about my childhood? Every day thinking, "Sala, is family mein main paida kyun hua?" That's all I remember. So how do you construct memories for yourself which are not centered around only the stress and the bad things that happen? And nowhere is this better expressed than in the lyrics of Sudarshan Fakir, which was sung in the mellifluous voice of Swargiya Jagjit Singh. ये दौलत भी ले लो, ये शोहरत भी ले लो, भले छीन लो मुझसे मेरी जवानी, मगर मुझको लौटा दो बचपन का सावन, वो कागज की कश्ती, वो बारिश का पानी, वो कागज की कश्ती, वो बारिश का पानी. There you are.
So lovely, sir. Thank you so much for that. So I think time to wrap up. We would like to listen to you. It's like a complete narration that all of us have been engrossed for the last 1.5 hours. But then, yes, everybody is time bound. So on behalf of the MD, Mr. Ravichandran, and the team at TMIBSL, and our partner, 1MD, Mr. Anirudh, who always helps us, I take this opportunity to thank Professor Dr. Shekhar Seshadri for providing his valuable insights. I also thank all the participants for joining us in this session today, and hope that there are certain valuable key takeaways for each of us that can be shared with the loved ones, which will help us guide our future. Looking forward for our next session on parenting with Dr. Shekhar Seshadri. Wishing you all a healthy, happy, physical, mental health. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for the time once again. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, sir.